of November. Now, there's an awful lot of scary stories going around in the news at the moment, especially concerning the actions of the Russian Federation in the Dnipro area of Ukraine. Now, in response to the United Kingdom and American decision to use Storm Shadow missiles against a deeply buried bunker, actually, in the Kursk region, and also an ammunition depot in the Bryansk region, Russia has responded to this with what I think would be termed not so much an attack as a demonstration of power. They fired an intermediate range ballistic missile at the city of Dnipro. Now, the city of Dnipro has very little in it for the Russians to target, which has any kind of military value. So they decided they would fire this missile with inert warheads. In other words, with warheads which had either no explosive power at all or limited amounts of conventional explosives. From the look of it, it looks like these were inert warheads that were fired, basically just great big chunks of steel and concrete. The thing is, they're coming in from space by this time at a speed of about 25 times the speed of sound. Now, this is near orbital velocity. It's coming in so fast, there is no way that you can shoot these objects down. But they're also traveling so fast that they're going to bury themselves hundreds of meters into the ground. And a kinetic weapon like this, even with no payload whatsoever of an explosive nature, is quite capable of taking out deeply buried command and control centers and underground facilities going down hundreds of meters. The Storm Shadow missile, incidentally, is used by the Ukrainians for a similar reason, to hit a deeply entrenched bunker system near to a manor house in the Kursk region. And this is a command and control center used to deploy its troops and its artillery and other ammunition in the Kursk Oblast in their attempts to dislodge the Ukrainians. Now, it's being painted in the media as being a major threat of nuclear Armageddon, but it isn't. And it isn't for a very simple reason. The Russians know that they can't use nuclear weapons because to do so would invite a massive response. A retaliatory response, maybe not a nuclear one, but certainly enough that Russia would effectively be flattened, not by nuclear weapons, but just by sheer force of conventional troops. It would be a disaster for Vladimir Putin. Now, Putin knows that he doesn't want to threaten his own regime, he doesn't want to threaten his own life, and if he did launch a nuclear attack of any kind, no matter how limited it was, it would provoke a response. If there were a danger to the Faslane nuclear base, 30 miles from where I'm sitting at the moment, it would start World War III, and everybody knows it would start World War III because there's the repository at Coalport of nuclear warheads which are used in the United Kingdom's nuclear deterrent, which is based on an American missile system and a British submarine, so it's a joint weapon. Now, in the Cold War era, when the USSR existed, when the Soviet Union existed, there perhaps was a rationale for having a nuclear balance, a balance of threat, to prevent Russia from encroaching any further into Europe, and that worked for a long, long time. But now the political landscape has shifted so much that the thought of a nuclear war is unthinkable. And the reason for having nuclear weapons, which was supposed to deter Russia from aggressive invasions, has plainly failed. The only people who were deterred by us having nuclear weapons were ourselves. The Americans were terrified of provoking World War III, and therefore their whole mutually assured destruction bluff was called by Putin. And he knew that the Americans would not respond and would not risk escalating anything that might upset the nuclear balance. So the whole of the deterrence thing has caused inactivity and delay, which has cost many thousands of Russian and Ukrainian lives by prolonging a war needlessly, which could have been stopped by other means much, much earlier on. As far as Scotland is concerned, I'm not worried about a nuclear strike here, but one of these intermediate range ballistic missiles that the Russians have, or even an intercontinental one, is capable of putting a ground penetrating spread of multiple warheads into Coalport, which would not necessarily provoke a nuclear explosion, but would certainly destroy a lot of the facilities underground. So it's possible that using an inert weapon with this amount of kinetic energy would do more damage in many ways than blowing it up with the nuke would. However, I don't think there's any chance that that's going to happen. However, let's get back to more domestic affairs, shall we say. Now, I can tell you right now, because I've just had an email and I have just seen the footage, that the Scotland Channel has shot a new title sequence for this programme. And the Scotland Channel has shot a series of movie clips of me driving the car and arriving in places, and a new tailpiece which has an illustration by Michael Larkin, which is the cartoon of the Inde-Car, as you probably know it, as the tailpiece for future broadcasts. And that is going to be used when Inde-Car goes live on the Scotland Channel, presumably in the next few months, we hope. So that's good news. Now, the other piece of interesting news, which I didn't mention in the preamble to this programme, is that the most recent, I think it was a Survation poll, which was published recently, showed that independent support has shot up another 2 percentage points, and support for the Union has dropped by 2 percentage points. And that means there's now something like 62% of Scotland's voting population who are now in favour of independence. And that leads me to my next little bit of news. You may have noticed, although it went largely unremarked the other day, that Kate Forbes recently said that there was a clear path to independence. Now, this is a rather sort of throwaway comment that she made, that she could see a clear path to independence, but didn't elaborate on what that path actually might be. However, despite the fact that the SNP has been very coy about what this clear path to independence might be, at least in their view, there is a clear path to independence emerging now. And there's about to be the publication of a book, The 30 Tenets of Liberation, which is a book which describes how Scotland can become independent without the permission of the United Kingdom. And it basically examines the entire history of the Union and of the two kingdoms of Scotland and England, and why it was that the Union of 1707, the treaty that was signed, did not create a new United Kingdom, because the two kingdoms could not be combined. The two crowns couldn't be merged, because the sovereignty vested in each one was vested in a different thing. For example, in England, the sovereignty of the English state is vested in the crown, but the crown is their monarch, i.e. King Charles, and his government, his parliament, is the seat of power, how that power is wielded. And we know this, Westminster sovereignty, that's what it's called. However, in Scotland, the sovereignty of the crown, and it is vested in the Scottish crown, and I'm not talking just about the hat that the king is meant to wear. The crown in Scotland is the symbol of where authority, ultimate political authority, rests in Scotland. It rests with the crown, and the crown is the community of the realm of Scotland. That means, in modern language, the people of Scotland are the sovereigns. In other words, we are the ones who can both appoint a king or a leader or a government, but just by the same token, we can also remove a ruler or a government as we see fit. And we've always had that right, and that right still remains. The problem at the moment now is getting the international community to understand the history of why Scotland still has this sovereignty and what it means for Scotland decolonising. Because it's quite easy, when you put together all of the historical documents, the actual facts as they're written down, that there was no United Kingdom created. What happened was the English crown renamed itself the United Kingdom of Great Britain. Scotland's crown was quietly hidden away and put in a cupboard, but actually the sovereignty of the Scottish crown is still vested in the people. It's just been bulldozed out of the way, and Scotland was added as a kind of annexed bit of this United Kingdom of Great Britain, which was basically just a rebadging of the English crown and the English Parliament. So because we know this, and because this documentation exists and it's been collated and it's ready to present to the International Court of Justice, the United Nations needs to see that evidence coming from a third party, because it can't come from a political party, because the political parties in Scotland are also recognise the sovereignty of the UK Parliament and therefore cannot make representations on behalf of the sovereign people of Scotland. Only the sovereign people themselves can do that by forming a liberation organisation and making their own presentation, and that is what Salvo has been doing and what Liberation Scotland is doing right now. Once that case has now been collated, now needs to be presented by a senior King's Counsel, a very senior lawyer, to the International Court of Justice for a ruling. Now, the ruling in this case would be advisory, because we know that the United Kingdom would deny all knowledge of this and they would drag their feet and there would be problems along the road. But if we get an advisory ruling from the International Court of Justice that Scotland is still a sovereign state and that people have been effectively denied popular governance by a foreign power, i.e. the English Crown, which has taken Scotland over without any part of the treaty agreement mentioning anything to do with that, it can then be demonstrated that Scotland is still a sovereign country and that the people still have the right to self-determination, and that's very fundamental to all of us. But not only that, having got an advisory ruling from the International Court of Justice, it's then quite feasible for a delegation from Liberation Scotland organisation to approach any United Nations member state for support. Once they have the support of just one single country from the UN who will say, yes, we agree Scotland has this right and we are going to support them in their attempts to decolonise, Scotland then must be listed for decolonisation by the UN and the process has to begin. It may take somewhere between 3 and 5 years for the decolonisation process to cycle through all of its bureaucratic machinations before we get a ruling on that. But if this happens, and this is a big if, but this is what is planned, if Scotland gets its right to do this and starts the decolonisation process, that means that Scotland can separate itself from the UK Union perfectly legitimately through the United Nations through this process. And there would be nothing that the English state, and I'm using this term very specifically because it's not a United Kingdom state, it calls itself the United Kingdom of Great Britain, but it would not be able to interfere in that process. That happens out with the country which is occupying the other nation which is trying to secede or trying to escape from its clutches. So this is very important. The fact that this starts to happen means that there is then a clear path to independence, a practical, legal route to independence using international bodies, not only to get this ruling in international law, but to support it by finding one or more, but basically one other United Nations member state to back Scotland's case. And that's all it would take. It only needs one sympathetic state to say, yes, Scotland has the right to be decolonised. We agree, we're convinced by the arguments of the ruling, and we think Scotland should be listed for decolonisation. And this is where it all goes. At this point, it's perfectly legitimate then for us to vote for a government in our own parliament which is not linked to the Union in any way and which is capable of repudiating the Union and offering the people of Scotland a final chance to have a referendum to express their own will. Now, we know at the moment that at least 62% of us want to leave the UK. And I would anticipate that will keep growing. Remember, about a year ago, it was 10% less than this. It was only 52%. It's gone up and up and up and up and up. And as the Labour Party government has become less and less popular, and as Anna Sarwar is guddling around, dancing on the head of a pin and trying to bend the truth round to mean something it doesn't, and trying to claim that he is capable of reintroducing legislation which his own party has already withdrawn from the United Kingdom all across the UK, all of that sort of stuff becomes irrelevant. Labour, the Tories, the Liberal Democrats, they're all going to be lumped in the same boat. The Unionist party's incapable of doing anything about this because it's been taken out of the United Kingdom's hands and is now being dealt with by international bodies, and other countries are supporting Scotland, it's very difficult for anybody from a unionist party to combat that narrative once it starts to take hold. And remember, the narratives here are important. The issue, or not the issue, but the events of recent days in Kursk, the explosion of this, well, not the explosion, but the use of this intermediate range ballistic missile by the Russians on Dnipro is indicative of how much public opinion is driven now by the algorithms and social media. The Russians are using this to change the narrative of the global stability that we've been enjoying for all these years, and to make us feel like we're on the brink of some kind of catastrophe when it actually isn't going to happen. But it shows you how powerful it is. And we now here in Scotland need to use the algorithms to drive the narrative in our favour as well. And that's what Inde-Car is about, and that's what I'll be doing over the next couple of years as we come up to the 2026 general election in Scotland. And that is where we need to actually vote for people we know are going to repudiate the union. It's getting candidates to come out and say that if they are elected, as well as representing you as their constituents, they will also completely repudiate the union. And that means they will deny the union. They will say it doesn't apply anymore. We reject it absolutely out of hand, and we will organise a referendum for everybody to decide whether they wish to stay in this union or not, and it will happen. And the United Kingdom will not be able to stop it, because we'll be in the process of being decolonised while that is going on. So it's very much more difficult for the UK to counter the huge narrative for independence when so many things are happening to make it start happening. So this is where the push is going to come from. So I don't want you to feel like you're in any imminent danger of being nuked by Vladimir Putin, because I just don't think it's going to happen. I disagree with nuclear weapons as a matter of personal philosophy. I could see why they were used in the Cold War, but I now think that they are just completely counterproductive. They don't actually function the way they were meant to. They're not deterring Russia. They're simply deterring us from doing anything. So they don't really work. But also, the Russians know that they can't nuke anybody, because if they did, there would be a massive response from NATO. Not going to happen. However, the narrative's the important thing. And that is what Russia does so well. This is what Putin does so well, is hybrid warfare of using public opinion and social media by making a single demonstration flight with a single missile which didn't even have a warhead on it to scare the crap out of everybody in the West and get them all talking about nuclear catastrophes when there isn't one actually going to happen. But there is a very good chance of independence happening, and we need to keep pushing that narrative, because that is far more positive than anything to do with nuclear weapons. And remember, after we are independent, we can decide to get rid of England's nuclear weapons and have them relocate them someplace else if they want to keep them. We wouldn't need them. Nobody's threatening Scotland, except, incidentally, our near neighbours, who are attempting to strip all of our natural resources away from us under our very noses. That actually is part of decolonisation as well, and we would be entitled to massive reparations for all of the stuff that's already been sold off from underneath us, which we were entitled to the full value of. And that would be part of the reparations involved in decolonisation. Again, something which England really, really doesn't want to have to do, but might be forced to in the future. Anyway, that is it from Inde-Car today. I hope you've enjoyed today's programme. Sorry, I'm still a little bit hoarse, still got a little bit of a problem with the lungs, but I'm still here. Anyway, hopefully I will see you very soon when I have something new to report. And I don't think it's going to be that long before you see me on the Scotland channel. In the meantime, keep the faith, keep donating if you can afford to. I'm always glad to have a little bit of donation money coming in. It helps me keep going. In the meantime, keep the faith, as I always say, but remember, keep faith in yourselves. And remember, we are now 62% of the Scottish population, and we are the ones who want independence. And there are more of us than there are of them. I'll see you soon. Bye for now.